Talk about it with Franjez. Today's special guest is an accomplished screenwriter for Lionsgate and Nickelodeon, the author of the industry-leading Save the Cat series, and a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Today's guest is Jamie Nash.
Yeah.
Welcome.
How's it going?
And joining us as a co-host, returning co-host, Michael Muqattash.
Holla, holla. What's up, Fran?
Very good, very good. How are you both doing today?
Can't complain. I'm on a podcast.
I like that. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank God. How are you?
Good. Can't complain. I'm ready for this one. This is going to be a really good one. Me and Mike have spoken about your book so many times, Save the Cat.
Cool. I mean that's great. I love talking about it. So let's do it.
Perfect. Let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, where I still kind of live. Baltimore County, Maryland. So I grew up kind of in the suburbs of the city, essentially. But that's where I live, and I only live a little bit further down the road. I live in a place called Ellicott City, Maryland, which is kind of between Baltimore and D.C.
Nice. And what was childhood like for you? What kind of kid were you? What were you into?
So I was really into Star Wars. Star Wars was the thing that kind of made me go all into movies. I was a big movie kid, action figures, collected Star Wars cards. And then I think when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, I was in the Star Wars fan club at the time. They used to have this fan club through the mail, and they used to send me stuff about Raiders. And I had no idea. I didn't really understand it. I was too young to know like serials and what that was all about. I didn't even know what archaeology was, at the time when I saw it. But then when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think that's what made me want to make movies, because at that point I realized people made movies, because it was like the makers of Star Wars and Jaws, and Close Encounters came together and they made Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it kind of triggered me. I think Raiders really, maybe I was a little bit into movies before then, but Raiders really kickstarted me, that I was just like a movie nerd. I saw everything in the 80s.
Nice. Was it movie theaters or at home?
Movie theaters. Yeah. I mean, I got into movies before VHS even became a thing, really. And honestly, my family didn't have cable TV till I was like in 7th or 8th grade. So I didn't have the experience of like watching, Blockbuster Video and stuff like that until I was more in high school and college. So it was movie theaters all the time. I was there probably twice a week. I was one of those kids that would buy a ticket for one thing and see 4 things. And back in the 80s, we were free range kids. So we were seeing R-rated movies when we were like 11. I remember I saw like movies when I was way too young to see them, but I mean, that's what we did all the time. And nobody was stopping you back then. They were just like, come on in, see whatever. I remember seeing ones like Highlander and I don't know, Conan the Barbarian and things like that. And they were like, and even like Freddy Krueger, Friday the 13th movies, all that kind of stuff I saw as a real little kid.
Nice. Well, what ideas did you have as a kid for like making movies? Back then, what type of movies did you want to make?
Yeah, so, back then, when I think back, and I was constantly trying to scheme a way to make a movie when I was a kid. Back then, most people made them on like Super 8 film. And I didn't have the money or the sophistication for that. So I was always trying to scheme to get a video camera. And I would say most of the stuff I wanted to make as a kid was almost like what would be fan fiction today. It was like, and it didn't make any sense, and I'd never show it to anybody. But it was things like, I wanted to make my own Conan the Barbarian movie with my friends, and I remember we even made one time. Where I remember doing a Star Wars thing with my friends, and it was really bad. I don't know, have you guys ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? What's it called? Not the remake. I can't think of what it's called. But these kids in the 80s remade shot for shot Raiders of the Lost Ark. Have you ever seen that by chance?
No, never heard of
Okay.
it. Mike, you've seen it?
No.
No.
Yeah, it's out there on YouTube. You can take a look. That's kind of what we were doing, but we weren't that good. Like their movie, and it. So what happened with their movie? Not to tell you a story about somebody else's story, but they made a shot-for-shot remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they like lit their garage on fire and stuff like that to do it. I mean, it was kind of what we were doing in the '80s because we had no supervision. You know, we had like weapons out there and things like that. And we were doing all kinds of stuff. So when I saw that movie, it was very emotional for me because it was basically it was almost like the perfect version of what we were trying to do. Like we'd film a scene and then kind of give up. But they actually made an entire movie. You could check it out. It's on YouTube. It's like, and they made a documentary about it. They wrote a book about it. Because at some point, Ain't It Cool News, the guy at Ain't It Cool News, he did a screening of it. He had recovered the VHS tape and they did a live, and it was sold out. And all these people came to it and they were amazed. Like when you watch it, you're like, these kids, like, I think part of it is the danger, the recklessness, because these kids did all kinds of crazy stuff they should never do, like lighting. I mean, when you see the scene, the shootout scene on it, I mean, their whole garage is on fire. It's super dangerous. So
That's wild.
you should totally go check it out. So it's a fun watch. But anyway, that's kind of what we were doing. We were doing reckless things on camera. I was making haunted houses a lot too, like because I couldn't make films. It was just too hard. Like I said, I made all these snippets. I remember I made like this Twilight Zone episode about two pool players. This is like when I was in 8th grade. It was like two pool players because we had a pool table, and one was the devil, and they were playing for somebody's soul or something like that. But I never finished it really. I had like 3 good shots. I did like cool pool scenes or something. But what I could do is I used to make haunted houses, and I used to make haunted houses like in my neighbors' basements and stuff, or sometimes my backyard. And we'd charge local kids to come in and go through the haunted house. So, and in some ways, that was satisfying the itch I'd later have to do horror movies and things like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you graduate high school?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I I went to college, and like most screenwriters, I went for a computer science degree. That's what I got.
Like most screenwriters?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think I was really risk averse. And at the time, I don't know, I lived in Maryland. I went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is like Maryland, like the lesser version. And I was very risk averse. So what I did was I became a computer science major. I became a computer programmer, essentially. And on the side at school, I used to take, you're supposed to take 15 credits, which is 5 classes. I used to take 21 credits a semester.
Wow.
And the reason I did it was I did all the film classes. I wasn't a film major, but I'd sign up for the film classes. And I actually, if you looked at my transcript, it said film major because you were only allowed to take the film classes if you were a film major, but you could take the computer science classes if you were any major. So if you looked at my transcripts or something, at first, it's for my first 3.5 years, it said film major. But the truth of the matter was I had no intention of ever graduating with a film degree because you had to take all this other stuff. They made you take like dance and things like that, stuff I was never going to take. I was like, I just wanted to take the film classes. So I took all the film classes. And then in the last semester, I switched it to computer science and graduated. But I did kind of, for fun, I made a lot of black and white. They were shot on a Bolex, which is kind of a crank camera. I had several movies, and a lot of them were horror movies, horror comedies, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's what I did. But I graduated with a computer science degree and went into the computer field after college.
What exactly computer field did you do?
Well, I mean, it's funny when I started, and you can see all this like nerd stuff that I was into, because movies and haunted houses. So of course, the reason I became a computer programmer, I wanted to make computer games. And there was a local company called Avalon Hill, which was down the street from me. It's a very famous company. And in fact, it's kind of known as the company that turned down Dungeons and Dragons. Like the Gary Gygax came to them and said, "Hey, I have this new game. It's called Dungeons and Dragons," and they laughed him out of the room because they used to make strategy games. They were known. So a lot of them were like based in World War II and stuff like that. They had a lot of games that you could play, and they were very complicated games. But I knew a lot about these games because they also did role-playing games, which I was into, like the Dungeons and Dragons of the world and stuff like that. They made all kinds of things. So I became a programmer. I was really their only employed programmer. And I made computer games for a few years until I realized that the computer game programming didn't scratch that creative itch the way I thought it would. You know, it was like, there was like 10 minutes of creativity and then like 10 years of programming, you know?
Yeah, because it's not like you wrote it, right? You're just programming
exactly.
somebody else's writing.
And basically what I was doing was I was programming a game that was already created because they had a board game company and they were turning those into games. It was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. And I kind of miss programming, like it scratched a lot of the same itches as writing. But it didn't scratch the itch, the creative side of it. It didn't do
Absolutely.
that. And eventually I actually ditched it and just went on to program for other companies. So I worked for I was a consultant mostly. So I worked for companies like John Deere and Visa and, you know, big Fortune 500 companies I would be a consultant for. And I did programming for many years.
When you were programming games, anything that's very mainstream that we would have known about?
No. So this is back in the PC days, and I remember the big thing coming when I was programming was Windows 95. So that was around the year I programmed. I was programming like 93 to like 2000 was around the era I programmed. So the big game I got out there, it was a game called, if you're an Avalon Hill person, if anybody here is an Avalon Hill person, and it has its niche, like there are people that they have websites devoted to Avalon Hill. They had a board game called Third Reich. It was the Third Reich. And it was a World War II game. It is basically you could play the Axis or the Allies. And it was this very complicated game. Like it almost took a lawyer to understand the rules.
Wow.
So for a programmer, I mean, people still debate the rules today. Like it was that dense. Like the booklet was like, the rule booklet was like 50 pages in this really tiny font. So for a programmer, it was a lot of work because you had to understand that, and the people that were playing the game would get angry if the rule wasn't implemented and stuff like that. So that was largely what I did. I did a couple other war games after that. Right around the time I was programming, a couple games hit that honestly, if I would have kept in the game space, this is where I would have gone. One was Warcraft, which became, you know, huge, but the first version of Warcraft came out, and I was huge into that because that was a war game. It was essentially a war game like I was making, but it had fantasy characters and backstories and the things I was interested in. So I was like totally into that. I was like, let's do this. And then like Doom and Quake came around, you know, around that time, and I started to get into 3D programming. And probably right about then, that's when I ditched it because I could make twice as much money consulting. And I sold out and went to the big leagues.
Nice. So you begin consulting, still not your passion. What comes next?
Yeah. So essentially, I was consulting, and while I was consulting, I started to write. I had written off and on from the time I was a little kid. And I had tried screenwriting on a few occasions, but there wasn't a lot of information out there. There was like 2 books. There was a book, Sid Field's Screenplay was out there. But I tell you, the book that really influenced me a lot, like when I was a kid, was Spike Lee used to put his screenplays in the back of his books. So I had like Do the Right Thing. I had that, and I had the screenplay. I think he had a book for She's Gotta Have It. And it was kind of a making of book. And then in the back, they would have a screenplay. So I learned a lot from that. And I just started to dabble like on the side as a screenwriter. And here's the big thing. I was a computer guy. So I was an early adopter in the internet. I was on the internet when people were still like, I'm not sure what that stuff was. I remember back when the internet first came out and everybody was like, go to www, something.com, and they made a big deal. Like that was the big thing. www. You had to have the thing.
World Wide Web. Like it just sounded grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every commercial would be like, www, starwars.com or whatever it was. And so I was an early adopter of the internet. And I think, I wonder if I ever would have been a screenwriter had the internet not come around. Because finally, when the internet came around, I could get information. I got Final Draft, the program that most writers use back in the late 90s, because the internet told me to get it, and then the big thing for me was, this is your life kind of thing, which is cool with me. There was a website called zoetrope.com. And zoetrope.com was Francis Ford Coppola. And if you know his history at all, The Godfather and all that stuff. But he was very much an independent spirit. He was always trying to do things different. In fact, going back to George Lucas, he brought George Lucas into his company, Zoetrope. And basically George made THX as like their first movie, and it bombed, and the company went out of business for a while, right? And then George wanted to do American Graffiti, but nobody would trust him because he was a little odd. So Coppola had to come and kind of co-sign it and say he'd be the executive producer and be responsible for it. But George and Francis always wanted to make this company independent of Hollywood. They didn't want to deal with Hollywood. They wanted to finance their own movies and stuff like that. And Coppola could never quite get it cooking, but George Lucas ultimately did, and he financed all his movies on his own. I mean, he would just pay for them and get all the profits. But so Coppola, though, he was still kicking around. And in the late 90s, he made this site called Zoetrope. And Zoetrope would allow screenwriters to post their screenplays if you read 3 other screenplays and gave criticism of those screenplays. Okay? So that became my screenwriting career, basically, because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how Hollywood worked. So I would go on Zoetrope. I would interact in the discussion groups. I would read other people's screenplays and give feedback, which to this day I still say was the best education I personally got, was reading people that weren't very good at writing screenplays and giving them criticism, because I realized all the things I hated about reading screenplays. I was like, I don't understand what this is about. It's like a vampire screenplay, and the vampire doesn't show up to like page 60 out of 100 or something. And it's like, I don't know what this is, And there was a lot of that. I mean, if you've ever dabbled in amateur screenwriters and reading their stuff, most scripts are like that. They're really, really bad. It's kind of funny the disconnect people get from watching a movie, and you're like, you've seen movies, right? The vampire just can't show up in the last 2 pages, or you can't, so you leave everybody in the dark for 70 pages, and then So Zoetrope became kind of my screenwriting thing. And the cool thing about Zoetrope was, like, Francis Ford Coppola would bounce around there.
Wow.
He would, like, there was even a thing where his people, if they liked an idea, would read your script, and it would say under evaluation by Zoetrope. So there was even that kind of carrot, that hope, you know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm going to be the lucky one and Coppola's going to make my movie. I don't think he made a single movie off of that site ever. By the way, that site, this is kind of wild. That site just closed like last year. It was
Really?
around. Yeah. And nobody was really using it for like the last 15 years of it. But for the first 6 years, at any given time, there were 300, 600 scripts posted that people were reading, and other people. They had a top 3 every month, and it was all free. It was all free. Coppola just did it because he was that kind of independent spirit. He wanted to help people. He wanted to. So really, I owe a lot to that website. That's a big, between the internet, which that was on, and that. I don't think I would have been a screenwriter if it weren't for those 2 things.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So you were self-taught in the beginning?
Totally self-taught. Totally self. I mean, the film school, I never took a screenwriting class. I don't think they had one at my school. they did have. I was also interested in writing. I remember the other class I took. By the way, I've used college. This is my hint to people about college. I use college as my own. I'm paying all this money. I'm going to do what I want to do in college, right? That's what I meant. I just took all the film classes because I wanted to take them. I used to like to play football, so I took the football gym class every semester or something like that because I used to like to play flag football. I love playing basketball, so I'd take the basketball class every semester just so I could have a pickup time. But what I used to do, there was a class, there was a advanced creative writing class. But of course, the advanced creative writing class had a prerequisite of like 3 other classes you had to take before. I didn't want to take those classes. I was like, I want to take the advanced writing class because I think I'm a good writer. So I used to forge my own signature as my. You probably can't do this anymore because it's probably all digital. As my counselor and say, oh yeah, it's okay. And I would just go in and because you weren't even allowed to take 20 credits. They were like, no, that's too much. And my counselor signed off, and they'd be like, okay, and they just let me do it.
Wow.
So
This guy was sneaking the movies and forged signatures.
Exactly.
He was a rebel, huh?
I was completely just forging and I used to laugh. I didn't even forge my signature. I just signed my name. I said, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just signing my name. I'm my own counselor. So nobody paid attention. So anyway, I took advanced creative writing, and not to humble brag to myself 30 some years ago, but I was like one of the best in the class because I loved it. And some of those people, they were still not figuring out. And I met a teacher, and she encouraged me to submit my writing to various magazines and things like that. I never did it, but yeah, I did. So when it came to screenwriting, I was completely self-taught. And honestly, when it came to writing, that was the only writing class I ever took, that one class. And that class wasn't really a teaching class. What it was, I remember the class, there was no teaching whatsoever because it was the advanced class. You already took the class. You just wrote, and you'd have to, she would read the writing. She would get up there and read the writing. And people would critique it. But if you know anything about college students, I teach them, most of them are kind of like looking down when it's time to critique. They're not really saying anything. But anyway, that was kind of that's really all the writing education I had. I'd read every book that came out. In the early 2000s, there were a lot of filmmaking books that started to come out. And I started to get, that's when I started to read books and stuff like that.
Nice. So what comes next? You're writing, you're reading all these books, you're consulting, and then when do you leave consulting or just completely go into screenwriting or novel writing?
Yeah. So I started to write screenplays, and I started to do zoetrope. And my first screenplay I entered in the Austin Film Festival.
Wow.
Nice.
It's the AFF.
You got balls for that, huh?
Yeah. And it was it was called the AFF, the Austin. AFF is Austin Film Festival. I think it's called Austin Heart of Film. So if you know anything about the Austin Film Festival, they run it at the exact same time they run the Screenwriting Festival. And the Screenwriting Festival, I don't think I'm wrong when I say this, it's the biggest screenwriter event, I'm going to say, in the world.
I was just going to tell Francisco that it's the biggest screenwriting competition in the world. Bro.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the biggest festival in the world. I don't know about competition. There's Nickel, that's one above it.
Oh, yeah.
But if you know anything about Nickel,
but it's up there.
Recently Nickel has changed their whole thing. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Nickel only accepts like recommended scripts from teachers and stuff now. It used to be wide open. But
you can go in through the blacklist, I heard.
Yeah, in the blacklist, you can. That's right. You can go through the blacklist. Yep. That's kind of the loophole. They accept a few from the blacklist. But the Austin Film Festival, what I was going to say is it's the biggest. It's almost like it's almost like a convention for screenwriters, right? So they have all these different speakers, and they have the contest, and they have roundtables, and they have parties at night, and they do all this stuff. It's a big gathering for screenwriters. And it's a great place to go. I've been there 4 times. So anyway, but I'll tell you about my first time. So that first screenplay, it ended up being a finalist in their comedy competition. So
Wow.
my first script out of the gate, and I'll tell you, it's a total nerd concept. I was thinking about this today. It's funny that you're having me my this is your life thing. I was thinking about this today. So my script was about it was basically the movie Clerks, Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
It was kind of Clerks set at a Renaissance festival, is what it was.
Nice.
And I was like I said, I was kind of a D&D nerd when I was a kid, but I was also I skipped over this part. I was I'll put this in quotes. I was a professional juggler. Okay, so I juggled. I juggled like bowling balls and torches, and I do a little comedy skit, and all that kind of stuff. And I did that. Rode a unicycle. Did all that kind of stuff. So I wrote basically a script about a guy who did that at a Renaissance festival and kind of the crazy things that he had. So it's sort of, write what you know. That's what they tell you to do. So I was like, I know about Renaissance festivals and I know about jugglers. And during that time, it was like, this is what was funny. About 4 years before that, like I had I was engaged and I broke up and it was, the girl that, it wasn't my high school sweetheart, but the one that I dated through college and stuff like that. So all my first scripts were all breakup scripts. Like my first 5 scripts were all like, so this was like a guy at a Renaissance festival and he breaks up with his fiance or whatever, and all my scripts were like that for my first 5. It was like, cause I was told write what you know. And I was like, well, I know the feelings in those, that is, I know the deeper feelings. So I could talk about that. And then later on, I'd write about other things as my life changed into other ways. But so that first script, I made it into the Austin Film Festival. I was a finalist, and it gave me a boost. It didn't do anything for my career. No agent called me up, nothing like that. But it told me I was doing something right, and it just fueled my fire. I was still programming, and then the next big event that really happened, I'll kind of skip over some smaller things. I mean, the next big event that happened, somebody optioned one of my scripts for $10,000. And to me, I was like, wow, somebody's paying $10,000 for my writing that I'm doing, this goofy stuff I'm doing at night, And that was another kind of, hey, you're on the right track. Now there's 2 people who have said, you're pretty good at this. And somebody actually put $10,000 down to do it. And so that was 2. And then a couple years later, I sent, there's this website called Inktip, and it still exists to this day. This is probably about 2003, 2004, something like that. And it had a post that the director of the Blair Witch Project was looking for his next movie. He hadn't made a movie since the original Blair Witch Project, for all kinds of reasons. There's a whole history behind that. And he was looking for his next project. They wanted contained horror stories and stuff like that. And I was working on a movie. This is the part I kind of skipped over. The reason I was writing wasn't to break into Hollywood. It was to make my own movies. That was the part I skipped over. I just thought I was going to do what Clerks did and grab a camera, and I was making good money in programming, put the movie on my credit card, and start making movies. That's what I wanted to do. So I started the Renaissance Festival thing. That was my intent. It was like, I'm going to make this movie. But then it got to be way too big. It was like, now I need a Renaissance Festival and costumes and jousting and all this stuff. I can't do it. So then I started to turn to horror a little bit because I loved Evil Dead as a kid. Like that was one of my favorites. I had seen Army of Darkness. By the way, today's the 33rd anniversary of Army of Darkness, which I saw when I was in college, my senior year, my last year. I made all my friends go to see it. They had no idea what it was, and I forced them all to see Army of Darkness the first day.
33 years, nice.
33 years. So I was a big Sam Raimi fan. I was a big horror movie fan. And so I started to write horror movies to write. And the first one I wrote was kind of a schlocky thing that was one, it's kind of so bad, it's funny kind of thing, which
Yeah.
and it was almost intended to be that. Like I was just like, I'm going to put anything I want into this, and it was a script called Two Front Teeth, which I actually made. I made the movie. I co-directed it with a friend of mine. We made it locally. I spent way too much money. I spent like, this is the thing about that kind of stuff. I think I spent $25,000. I didn't spend that much of my own, but it was split between me and the other guy. We probably spent $35,000 at the end of the day. But I was well, I wasn't single. I was married. I shouldn't say I was single, but I was. I didn't have kids. I didn't really have anything. So I could put stuff on my credit card. I was making good money.
What was the money used for specifically?
So yeah, the money. This is kind of funny too. The money was used. It wasn't used on actors, that's for sure. We did pay.
I figured.
I think we paid them maybe $100 or something. The actors. That said, I think that the two main actors we might have paid like $1,000, for 2 weeks of work or something like that. So it wasn't horrible. We weren't that cruel to them. But a lot of the crew and stuff, they didn't get paid. They didn't get paid much. And they were in it kind of like we were. I would volunteer on their films. They would volunteer on mine. It was that kind of thing. It was transactional to an extent. So some of it was spent on special effects. It was very gory and stuff like that. But honestly, that kind of stuff you can get for pretty cheap if people aren't professionals. You know what I mean? Like if they're just wanting to do it, they'll do it for cost. And like you can get a lot of special effects for like $1,000, $2,000. It doesn't break the bank. We had all kinds of weird things. We bought a used trailer, like a mobile home or whatever, a trailer park home, but from a place that disposed of them. And what was funny about it is we found out you could buy it for $50. Like you could get a full home like that, and they would tow it wherever you wanted, right?
Including the tow. That's wild.
Including the tow. And here's why. Because that company was already making money from the disposal of it. They were already taking like $400 for the disposal. So they agreed to just take one they were going to throw away and tow it for us for $50 is basically what they did. And then they were like, you can, I think then I can't remember if we had to then pay them to dispose of it again. So they probably double dip, or something like that. So
That's hilarious.
We had them tow it to a state park and just plant it there, and then we shot the movie there. We shot a big part of the movie, not the whole movie, but a big part. So anyway, that was only $50. I'm trying to think of all the things. Food was expensive. Like food was $5,000 or something to feed the whole crew, and we had a big crew. We had a truck we had to pay for. We had to rent. We had a generator. We bought all new camera equipment. That was the big expense. But I still, to this day, I kind of needle my co-director. So we split the price. And what he did was, he was more of a film guy. I was more of a story guy. He was the technical guy. He knew cameras and stuff like that. And he kind of had his own business doing that. Like he'd do wedding stuff or some legal stuff and things like that. And I remember he bought the camera he wanted, and he bought all these new lights. And we were both going to put in like $10,000 initially. And what he did was he bought that stuff and he said, $10,000, done. But he was going to keep that stuff for his thing. So his $10,000 was upgrading his camera system, where my $10,000 went for like portable toilets and food and getting a trailer we were going to destroy. My $10,000 went to that. I wasn't getting any of that back. And he was cool. I mean, he even said we could sell the camera and stuff. I was like, that's fine. So that's kind of where our money went. It didn't really go, it went for food, it went for camera equipment, which most people have the camera equipment. He had camera equipment. He just wanted better camera equipment for the shoot. I'm sure it went for some other things like insurance. We had to buy some insurance, things like that. Some legal work, not much legal work. We were kind of riding by the seat of our pants. And then a lot of stuff in post, just especially back then, like to get something color corrected or get a special effect, it kind of cost money if you did any kind of post work. So that's where the bulk of it went.
Where'd the film go? Where did you premiere it?
the movie came out. We got a distributor, and it basically came out on DVDs. Not even Blu-ray at the time, just regular DVDs, and it basically came and went, right? Here's the funny story though about it, the funny postscripts, and honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. First of all, the movie is weird and wacky, like I always wanted to do. It's not even really good, but it you can't blame us for trying. Like we went for it. We went for it. And nobody saw it. Maybe it sold 1,000 copies or something at the end of the day. Years later, do you guys know Red Letter Media is? Have you ever heard of Red Letter Media?
No.
They're a famous website, or YouTube channel or something. They kind of went famous for like making fun of Phantom Menace when it came out, but then they got famous, like they've been around ever since, and they're a big time. And they had our movie on it like 20 years later, and that thing got 10 million hits. Them reviewing it. So in some ways, while we only sold 1,000, I might be exaggerating, but it was at least 1 million hits that it had. They got millions of people watch that, them making fun of it in kind of a way that appreciates the movie. I mean, they're making fun of it, but that's kind of what it's made for. And then to wrap all this in a bow, the movie kind of got a cult following through that, but it's hard to find because we just had that one distributor. I never bothered to re-up it or anything like that. It always seemed too much of a hassle. But last year, a company came to me and wanted to put it out like a special Blu-ray. They wanted to do interviews. They wanted to repackage the artwork. They wanted to clean it up and do all this stuff. And it actually came out this Christmas.
Wow.
Sadly,
Congratulations.
yeah, sadly, it hasn't shipped yet because this company kind of tends to be late on their movies every now and then. But it will ship, and a lot of people have bought it. So nobody's seen it yet, but I was actually thinking about that today too. I was like, maybe it'll come out this week, or maybe it'll come. It's due. It's pending any day.
Any day now.
Issue. Yep.
Absolutely. So how to go next? Are you excited to continue doing more? You leave the consulting where we are.
Yeah. So that's where I get to the Eduardo Sanchez Blair Witch thing, the ink tip thing. So this guy's looking for a thing, and I was writing my next script to make like Two Front Teeth. This is actually before I made Two Front Teeth, but it was already in the pipeline, and I was like, well, I kept writing. I didn't stop. I was already writing. So I came up with this idea, and I wanted to do something that was kind of funny. And my idea was, it was an alien abduction movie, but instead of the alien abducting the rednecks abduct the alien. And that was the script. And it was called Probed, is what it was called.
Nice.
And I sent that log line to Eduardo, and he said, yeah, that sounds cool. I'd like to read it.
Wow.
And he read it, and he said, I really like this. This is like the best thing I've read since The Blair Witch. This is the first thing I've got excited about, in a long time. And he was like, why don't we meet or something, or why don't we talk on the phone? It turned out he lived a half an hour away from me. He had just moved from Florida, which was the home base of Haxon, back to Maryland, where they shot Blair Witch in Maryland. But it was really a Florida, University of Central Florida team that shot the Blair Witch. But Eduardo himself was from Maryland. And after all his success, and he got some money and everything else, he bought a house in Maryland and moved back. So he and I met. And to make a long story short, after some development, it became less of a comedy and a little bit more dramatic, but weird. It's like a quirky, weird movie. We ended up making that, and he got the Blair Witch team together. They basically, it was the first movie he had made since Blair Witch, and he brought them all back together. And there were tons of investors who either invested or didn't invest in the Blair Witch that were like, whenever you make another movie, we want to invest in that. So,
absolutely.
So when they kind of said, hey, here's the movie, and they had artwork and all this stuff, they had creature design from this company called Spectral Motion, who did all of like Guillermo del Toro's movies. we actually had an in with David Goyer, like the writer of like Dark Knight and Batman, but at the time he was doing Blade and stuff like that. And so we had designs, we had all this stuff, and essentially a lot of people signed up to invest in this movie. And I think it had about a $5 or $6 million budget.
Wow, nice.
So I went from this cheap two front teeth thing that cost 25,000 to more of like a $5 million budget, and because of Haxon, that's the company that did Blair Witch, because of their relationships, or they lived in Florida, so Universal Studios Florida was a place that they knew everybody. You know, they were totally in with Universal Studios, and they Universal they went to Universal and said, we'd like to shoot this here. We'd like to build and this is in Florida. We'd like to build a set. And they had, at the time, Universal was trying to be a working studio. And they had a couple movies. They had like a wrestling show. You know, they had game shows. They had all this other stuff going on. And of course, they were very excited. They were like, a movie shooting here? That'd be awesome, just for our image and what we want to do. But they had to read the script first. And somehow they read the script and liked it so much that they sent it upstairs to higher level Universal. And it got shopped around, and there was a group called Rogue Pictures at the time. And I think they were Focus Films. Like, if you know how Miramax and Dimension were, it was Focus and Rogue. So Rogue was the horror movies, the action movies, and Focus was like the Oscar movies or whatever, the Sundance movies. And there were two writer, producer, executives running it at the time, Seamus and Lindy, and they're kind of famous. They wrote a lot of Ang Lee's movies, and they loved it. And they said, we want to pick this up. We're starting this new Rogue Pictures thing. It's going to be one of the first movies out of Rogue Pictures. And they basically picked it up for distribution.
Nice.
So they picked it up before we started to shoot it. The movie came out. Now here's your typical Hollywood story. The movie was done, but by the time the movie was done, Seamus and Lindy left Rogue Pictures, and somebody new came in. And I think it was somebody from Dimension, and they started running it. And when they saw the movie, they didn't really like it. They were just like, "This isn't our movie, nah." And they kind of just punted it to DVD, and I never saw an ad for it. I never saw a trailer for anything for it. It just it showed up in Best Buy. I remember my Best Buy, ad. It had a little picture, Altered, in it. And I was like, they changed the name to Altered. They didn't like the Probe name. And I saw Altered. I was like, oh, there it is. And I went to Best Buy, and it was sitting there. And I was like, oh, there it is. It's there. But nobody really noticed it. So years later, it's actually a pretty good movie. And it has a lot of fans, but they're usually like hardcore horror movie completists who see everything. And you can even tell a horror completist and say, have you ever seen Altered? And some of them have never heard of it. And then they watch it and they're like, wow, this is really good. Why didn't this ever come out in the movies? Like, it's kind of like become one of those hidden gems to certain people. Like, it's out there and they can't believe they've never heard of it or seen it. And then when they see it, they're kind of blown away. They're just like, I can't believe this never came out. So I'm kind of giving it more credit than it's due, but I think a lot of that is because most people have never heard of it. So anyway, that was my first movie. And after that, and I made I think I made six figures. I know I made six figures from that or more, a little more, because it was a $5 million movie. And then the collateral around it, like they hired me to write a Bible for the sequel. I did some, what they used to call transmedia. Like I did some like web campaign stuff and things like that. So I made a good amount of money from it, but I was still working my day job because my day job made a lot of money. And I was working from home, by the way. I was a consultant. So I worked,
Nice.
I could write and work from home. I've been working from home since 2000.
Nice.
So that kind of launched me in the independent world. I started, and when I say it launched me in the independent world, a lot of my work was coming from the Haxon, the Blair Witch kind of family, the extended family. They would hire me to do rewrites. They would option my spec scripts. They would bring me in on projects they were working on. So my first few years when when I moonlight, it was kind of my side gig. It was mostly with them, mostly. And occasionally somebody else, like, because I'd write other genres. So I'd branch out.
Any of the information you put in the Save the Cat books, were you accumulating around this time, where it's like you're learning your own systems that don't exist in current books?
Yeah. So here's what happened with Save the Cat. So number one, Save the Cat. I did not write the original Save the Cat, but there's a story behind that too. Okay.
Rest in peace, Blake Snyder.
Blake Snyder wrote the original Save the Cat around, I think it came out in 2006.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, Altered came out in 2006, and I think Two Front Teeth came out in 2006. So I met Blake Snyder in 2003, okay? And this is another one of these early, my screenwriting career, internet things. I joined this group back then, and it was from the Zoetrope thing. I think the people I met from Zoetrope, there were certain people that started to, they made a website. They made us, we were like this, they had this exclusive group. It was called the screenplayers.net. It's not around anymore. And in the early days of the internet, having a website was a big deal. It was like a thing. Like, it was kind of, nobody had one. Even having email was a big deal to an extent.
Absolutely.
And they had this exclusive group that promoted the group's work. We put log lines up there, so we put little pitches up there. Might put a movie poster. There were bios, there were interviews with us, there were stuff, and it was just, you go to screenplayers.net and you'd find stuff. And what we also did, we would interview industry people, so to get other industry people to look at the site. That was our plan. And they interviewed Blake Snyder on it before he did Save the Cat. This was just, Hollywood screenwriter. And while he's kind of, a lot of people knock him because he only made two kind of cheesy movies, like one really like legendary bad movie, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, and then this other one that was a kid's movie, Blank Check. But he also sold a script to Steven Spielberg. He got hired for $1 million to write a Herbie movie, like all these other, if you look at his resume, this is common in screenwriting, like people that you say, oh, that screenwriter sucks or something. If you look at their resume, it's probably a lot different than what you think from watching their movies. And he was a legit, like, all of us wish we were him kind of person. But at the time, for whatever reason, he was kind of, I wouldn't say on the back end of his career, but he was kind of on the back end of his career. Like, his hot moments were in the 90s, and he was kind of figuring out what to do next. He looked at us, and I think he wanted the camaraderie. I think he just liked what we were doing. And he was just kind of a yes and kind of guy. Like, he'd just be like, I'm going to do that. I'll do that. Yes and. So he joined our group. He joined this group. It was kind of weird because here we were, all a bunch of nobodies, and here he was like a real screenwriter, and he came into the group. So he started to look around at our group, and he saw what I was doing. And at the time, he saw Altered, which was a horror comedy. I'd written a bunch of comedies at the time too, like the Renaissance Festival thing, but a whole bunch of other ones too. I thought it was going to be a comedy guy, like Clerks and Kevin Smith, until I started to write things to make, which became horror, and they mostly became horror comedy. So he was looking at my stuff, and he was like, "Hey, I have this idea. Would you co-write it with me? Because I need a younger comedy writer to help me out with it." He's like, "I just think your sense of humor would be better for it. I want to bring you in, and we can co-write it together." So we started co-writing this script together. And during the outline phase, he's using all these terms like, okay, well, then in the fun and games section, we'll do this. And then in the bad guys close in, all is lost, this will happen. And at the time, I just thought all of this was Hollywood jargon. I just thought it was Hollywood lingo. Some guy would be there with a big cigar, like, and then in the all is lost, you got to do this. I just thought that's what they did. But in reality, this was his process. And I think he was already writing the book at the time. Like, he had been writing the book over a span of time. And he was using the book almost on me, like without telling me this is what he's doing.
Yeah.
And we essentially did the Save the Cat process on that book. So to this day, I always say, I think I'm like the first person besides him to ever use the Save the Cat process.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I can't imagine he did that with anybody else. So that's how I met Blake Snyder. That's how I became friends with him. That's how. And then when I read his book, honestly, when I read his book, I was like, "This is a really cool book," but I didn't think much of it because I had already done it all. Like it wasn't news to me. I was like, "Oh, I did that." Like almost down to even the board. Like he has a chapter about the board, the index cards that you use, and he has a specific name for it. He calls it a 10-20-10, and he said that to me one day. He said, I was like, what's our next step? And he's like, let's do a 10-20-10. I was like, I don't know what that is. And it turned out it was index cards. So I had already, when I read the book, I kind of flipped through it. I'm like, this is a cool book for everybody else, but I kind of know all this. I don't need it. I already have the beat sheet. I've been using it. And I kind of started to dabble in his ideas. Maybe when the book came out, I started to more formally use his ideas on my own projects. And through doing that, I learned his process, but I also learned what it was missing. At the time, I think it was missing a lot of character arc stuff. I think it was missing a lot of character stuff in general. It was more plot driven. And then when I started to teach, which happened maybe 12 years later, it would happen more like 2012, something like that, somewhere around that time. That's when I really started to think more about his book, and because I started to teach his book, and then people would ask questions, and that's when I think I started to come up with other things. But here's the other thing. I was on Zoetrope. I was in a private group with like two other guys. It was my friend Pete Barnstrom, who I co-wrote some scripts with, and another guy, Jason Holborn, who I haven't seen in many years, haven't heard from. And we would be in that discussion group every day, picking and pulling Save the Cat processes apart, like poking holes at it, trying to come up with new, like saying, these 10 genres, there's other genres, right? We debate it and have these, and for many years, we had these debates about every aspect of that book. It was like the most intense Save the Cat book club you could ever have. And between that, and I was doing it because I was trying to figure out my own process. I was a computer programmer. So for me, I was like, how can I create a repeatable process to write screenplays? And I was constantly thinking, to the point where I was like, before AI even came around, I was like, what of these things could I replicate in a computer? How could I teach a computer to do these things? And I was very interested in that kind of thing. And Save the Cat was kind of my basis for that. So when I started to teach, I started to come up with a lot of ideas. And cutting far down the road, my first Save the Cat book was Save the Cat Writes for TV. And honestly, what happened there was many of my students, I would teach Save the Cat, and they would come up to me and they'd be like, can I use this to write a pilot? Can I want to be a TV writer. I don't want to do a film. Can I use it to write a pilot? And I'm an easygoing teacher. I'd be like, yeah. I was the guy who forged his own advisor notes. I'm like, I kind of am like, make the college experience what you want. It's your money. I don't, you pay so much, make it what you want. So when they came to me with pilots, I was like, yeah, you can do it. But in the back of my head, I was like, I don't think it's going to work. And then I started to think about it a lot. I'd be driving home thinking like, it doesn't work. And I started analyzing it. I started coming up with new ideas. And I started to write my own pilots using Save the Cat. And I realized it had its limitations. But then I started to figure out those limitations. I started to figure out where it was different and how it was different and the things you had to teach and things like that. And that's how I ended up writing Save the Cat Writes for TV.
I gave, I don't know if you're familiar with the Locks, the rap group?
No.
Jadakiss, you ever heard of Jadakiss?
Yes.
Well, his bandmate, Styles, who's a phenomenal rapper, I gave him a copy of Save the Cat and the original, and I gave him a copy of your workbook.
Oh, awesome.
Actually,
Thank you.
yeah. I go to the same barber as Styles.
Oh, nice. That's
I
great.
told that to Michael John White when I met him, and he started laughing. He goes, "Come on, dude, you go to a barber?"
Hey,
But-
it's you meet people like that at the barber. You got to go to the barber.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thanks for doing
yeah.
it.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
What was Blake Snyder like?
Super nice guy, and people still hit me up. They like to hit me up and tell me stories about their interactions with Blake. And for my interaction was all great. Now, here's a weird thing with me and Blake. I knew him for many years. I never met him. I never met him face to face. I only talked to him on the phone because I was in Maryland. He was in LA. So I never actually met him face to face. Had many of long phone calls. This was pre-Zoom, so I never even Zoomed with him,
Wow.
we didn't do that back then. Skype didn't even show up to 2010 or something like that. And he what we didn't mention, I think you alluded to it, is he suddenly died in like 2009, I think it was. He had I can't remember if it was an aneurysm or something like that, but it was like a sudden stroke or, it was a very sudden death. And he was in his early 50s. So he, I never got to meet him. But to this day, I can't tell you how many people message me and say he would, and this is how I knew him too. He did the same with me. If you sent him your log line, he would respond to it. He'd be like, "Here, I'll give you some help." If you asked for advice, if you sent him an email and asked for advice, he would help you. He had time. He would listen to you. And I've tried to take up that mantle too. If somebody messages me, I'll talk to him. I don't care. I always put this. I always say this to people. I'll do anything if you don't make me read. And it's not so much. That's just work. Once you make me read something, then it's work. And that's a whole nother. Because when I read something, it takes me 2 full days. That's 2 full days of full-time work. So that's the only limit. And I'm sure he probably had this, or knowing him, he probably said, "Sure, I'll read it," and then never did. It probably ended up in his hard drive. But
Fran, he
yeah.
put his email in his book. The
he
first
put his
book.
email in his book.
Yeah.
That's
That's
amazing.
crazy, right?
That is crazy.
Yeah.
How did you go about writing another version of the Save a Cat after he passed? How does that work?
Yeah. So his editor, B.J. Markle, and it was literally the person he's worked on all of Blake's books. He actually had a piece of Blake's business, right? So he owned the franchise, so to speak, and kept the torch going after Blake passed. And what's funny is Blake's mother, who's still alive, she's 100 years old. I think she's 101 or something.
Wow.
She owns a third, I think, of I don't know exactly. Maybe I'm not supposed to say, but she owns a piece of it. I know. But BJ he's still he does the website. They do classes. They have a contest. They have a whole ecosystem. And it's actually grown since Blake's death because when Blake was doing it, he did his classes, which were live classes. We didn't really have Zoom and stuff. Even in 2010, it wasn't as popular. So he did some live classes. He did some live events. But since then, it's grown into a contest, a website with tons of information, more books, etc. So it's grown larger since he passed. He wrote 3 books, and then there's another collection of his blogs. So yeah, I mean, the initial 3 books are all him. And the Save the Cat writes a novel book, which he didn't write. I mean, that thing is almost as big of a juggernaut as his original book, almost to the point where people don't even know about the original book. And keep in mind, the original book is still a bestseller. It's still, trust me, I look at my books all the time to see where they rank. His is always number 1. And
Wow.
maybe my book will beat him for one day when it first comes out. That's it. It's always top of the list of
His book.
books.
His book is for the new generation of screenwriters. It's like a Bible to them.
It is. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like what Sid Field's screenplay was for me. It's funny because Sid Field's screenplay was probably about 10 years old when I got it. Blake's book, is about 20 years old now. So it is 20 years old, and it does get
Yeah.
knocks for that because the younger people are like, he loves Legally Blonde. What an idiot, or something, whatever. Because and Blake had certain tastes. Like he liked very commercial. He liked comedies. There were certain types of movies that have kind of even fallen out of fashion now that he talks about. But when I was a kid, when I say when I was a kid, when I was in high school or whatever, every book was talking about Chinatown, and I was like, can we give Chinatown a break? You know what I mean? Like, I'm sick of hearing about I love Chinatown, but I don't need every book to tell me about Chinatown.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I'd say about Blake's book is he kind of said, you know what? I'm going to talk about Legally Blonde, and I'm going to talk about Scream, and I'm going to talk about, he talked about movies people went to in the last couple months, as opposed to like some movie from a long time ago or something like that. Like, let's talk about The Wizard of Oz or something like that.
Yeah.
He was more like he talked about contemporary movies he was watching. And I think in some ways, I wouldn't say it was revolutionary, but it was a breath of fresh air. Because if you read like Robert McGee's book, that's another famous one, Story. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's
I
like
read that one.
it's like this thick. It's like
Yeah.
written by the smartest man to ever live. It's hard to. He's talking, and you got to read it 5 times to kind of process. But his book, Chinatown and Casablanca and things like that, they were his. And still to this day, when he gives lectures and stuff, they're kind of older movies, Tootsie and things like that. So Blake really modernized that. And I've kept that going myself. Like when I write a book, I write about the movies that are out like this year, knowing that they'll be dated in 10 years, but they'll be less dated than Casablanca and Chinatown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely makes sense.
I was happy to hear about the Hereditary movie in your Save the Cat Rights for Horror book.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I was yeah.
I literally was stuffing things like Sinners in there at the last second, and before because it you have to turn stuff in. But if I saw Sinners and I was like, and they came back to me for an edit, I'd be like, oh, let me stick Sinners in there. Let me stick Weapons in there or something like that. And I tried to get up to the last second kind of information. I guess nowadays you can always go back and edit, but honestly, we probably never will. We'll probably just leave it the way it is, and that's the way it
Might
is.
as well. Yeah, you might as well.
Have you ever read Joe Chamberlain's Nutshell Technique?
I know of it, but I have never read the book. I've
It's
never
good.
read it. Yeah.
I took a course with her last year.
Yeah.
I think with Save the Cat, it's a really heavy-hitting combo.
Yeah, the nutshell technique. A lot of novelists. I originally heard of it from the novel community, but it's kind of bled over to the screenwriting community as well. I think there's a lot of advertisements on social media for screenwriters as well.
Yeah, there's like your concept about the shard of glass. It like crosses over with some of the stuff she says too.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And that's the thing about Blake's book. So Shard of Glass is a Blake concept. I've kept a lot of Blake's concepts and added my own. But like Blake was an aggregator. Like when I read Blake's book, I didn't think he invented hardly any of it. You know what I mean? Like I thought he took my favorite parts of different books. He took a little bit from McGee. He took a little bit from Sid Field. He took a little bit from Hero's Journey. He took all these bits and pieces, and then he added some new stuff, kind of like what I did, what I do with my books to his. And then he did it in such a way that it wasn't Robert McGee's story where it's like, I am a professor. I'm going to give you it in these flowcharts and stuff like that. He did it in a way that was more like, hey, I'm just some goofball. I'll teach you how to do it. And if I can do it, you can do it. Come on, let's come on in. Let's roll our sleeves up and do it. And that's kind of what his approach to the book was. So it doesn't surprise me if anything. And now people have read Save the Cat, and then they have their riffs on Save the Cat and things like that. But he was riffing on things before him, and now people have riffed on him. And, so it's all just a big mix of ideas.
But the 10 genres seem very original compared to like the Save the Cat, where you can say, okay, these are in stories already, like you said.
Right.
But the genres, I never heard of anything like that.
So
the way he presented it.
there are things out there like him. I found them after him. I think there's like, I think it's Pulte's 36 ideas or something. There's like 4 other people that have something very similar that came before him, but
Okay.
some are like the 7 story ideas or the 34. Then they're all different. So it wasn't completely original. However, this is what I'll really give him credit for with the 10 genres. I think he nailed the 10 genres to the point where those debates I say we used to have on Zoetrope privately were constantly like, there's no way these are the 10 genres, right? We could think of other ones. But to this day, as somebody who tries to think of them, I think he nailed the 10. I think he got them right. I think he figured out the 10 genres. I have some debate on some of them, like some of them I almost think have to be combined with other genres to work and stuff. But I really haven't, in all my years, I haven't come up with, this movie isn't covered by any of these. He really did a good job with the genres, like figuring them out.
Yeah. Nice. Could you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Oh yeah, sure. So I co-host a podcast with one other screenwriter and screenplay consultant, Jimmy George, and Bob Rose, who's kind of like, I don't even know what to call him. He's like the biggest movie fan in the world, but he's also a very funny person. And we basically, every episode, we take a movie and we analyze the movie for screenwriting tips and lessons. So, we did, I'm trying to think of we did Send Help last week, the Sam Raimi movie. A lot of Sam Raimi on this podcast. We'll go through it and talk about a lot of save the cat techniques. For me, they don't necessarily do that as much, but we might talk about crafting character arcs. We might talk about setup payoff. Any kind of screenwriting topic that we think bubbles up or is done really well in the movie. And usually our podcasts run anywhere from hour and a half to 2 hours. So we really dig deep. But basically it's 4 writers. It's kind of to, watch the movie before you listen, and then sit down and learn these techniques through the movie.
That's awesome. I like that. We're nearing the end of the podcast. If you could please let the people know where they can find you, anything you have coming up you want them to tune into, and any last words.
Yeah, sure thing. Probably the easiest place to find me is my website. Again, I'm old school. It's like the 90s. It's Jamie Nash. www.jamienash.net. And mainly the reason to go there is to find ways to contact me if you want to contact me. My email, I don't think my email's on there, but there's a messaging thing that goes right to my email, and I'll email you back. So if you want to contact me, go to that. I don't have to follow you or anything like that. Or if you want, I also do screenplay consulting. So if you're interested in having somebody either talk to you, almost like I'm kind of like a screenwriting therapist to a lot of people that get stuck and things like that. A lot of people just like to talk for an hour or ask me questions about how to get started or whatever. I do that as well. And I will read your stuff, but you'll have to pay me to read stuff. But you can also just message me if you have questions or things like that. I'm totally open to that. You don't have to pay me for that. Feel free to find me and do that. I'm on Twitter or X a lot. That's probably my social media of choice. And I'm Jamie_Nash on that. Another good way if you want to contact me and you don't want to go to my website. As far as what's going on with me, it's funny. I don't have any movies right now. I had a movie come out this year, but it won't be out till next year. It came out everywhere in the world except here, and it was an animated. Yeah, and it's an animated movie called Mission Santa Yo-Yo Saves Christmas. It's a kids movie. I do a lot of kids movies. Nickelodeon and things like that over time, which is a whole nother story. How I got into that. So that's the only thing. But you won't be able to watch that until Christmas, and I don't even know where yet. I have no idea where it's even going to show up. It's already it's played theaters in Croatia and Russia and Germany and India and all these other places, South America, but not in the U.S. this year. So you'll have to wait till next year. The main thing I'd say, if you want to check me out, check out my books. Save the Cat writes horror. Save the Cat writes for TV, or the Save the Cat Beat Sheet workbook. And I also write novels. You can check out my recent novel. I have a horror novel called Haunted Girl. You can check that out. It's kind of a possession story. But that's about it.
Awesome. Mike, any last words or questions?
I just wanted to let you know I really enjoyed your books. I have the Save the Cat, the Beat Sheet workbook, and I have the horror book, which I was really excited about. And I like the advertisement you had. I saw one of them where it says "Scare the Cat."
Right.
That was funny.
Yes.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah. And just a pleasure to talk to you and hear from you. And Fran, thanks for hosting on your platform. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was very excited about this one.
Likewise. Thank you for your time and your great conversation. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Peace and love.